I've had a few questions online about piano chords and how you get different dynamics and different flavours from just basic chords. Well, I'm going to play a chord sequence which is used a lot in rock and pop. It's this. Now, the technical term for that is chord 1, chord 5, chord 6 and chord 4, meaning that you can transpose that into any key. But I'm going to work in the key of G. So we've got a G chord. Now that, essentially what I've got at the moment is the left hand plays the bass note and then the right hand plays the chord. Now in a major or minor chord there are 3 different notes, sometimes called a triad. So what I've got here is a G chord where I've got my G in the little finger here, D and B. Now the way I change to the other chords is that I pick the closest possible inversion. Now an inversion means you swap the notes around until you get the chord that's closest to the current chord. So G to D involves very small movements instead of this. Or it doesn't sound very musical, it's a sudden jump that doesn't really work. Also means if you pick the closest inversion, you don't really need to look at the piano either to be able to find where the next chord is. Because everything is in reach, everything is within the sort of octave reach that I've got there. So I've got a G chord which has got B, D, G. The D chord is A, D and F sharp. The E minor chord is B, E and G. And then C, E and G gives me my final chord which is C. Notice the absence of the word major in all of this. Classical musicians would say G major, G minor. But actually the default is that you have a major chord. So if somebody says G, it means G major. There's your D major, E minor, C. Now, in terms of volume levels, let's assume I've got my chord sequence there, that's fine. How am I going to increase or decrease volume in more ways than just touch? Well, the answer is it's all to do with how much bass you play or how much of the low end of the keyboard you play. If I played a G chord like this, you can see that the left hand is over here. But if I move down an octave, the fact that the left hand is lower has given it a bit more weight, given it a bit more depth and bass end. Therefore, it's a bit louder. You sometimes have people who play 2 Gs with a chord. Sometimes, though, those left-hand notes can really drown out the harmony of that chord, so you've got to be a little bit careful when you do this. Sometimes in a chorus you may have the 2 notes together just to give extra volume, but you've still got to be able to hear your chords. What I did there was to actually make the rhythm so that the bass note came first, with the right hand coming shortly afterwards. Just gives it that you can hear that because I've separated the left and the right hands, it actually means you can hear both of them, or the listener latches on. So one thing you can also do with the left hand, and this is kind of a halfway house really, is to use the root of each chord, but include the fifth note. On the keyboard, this is generally 5 notes apart. G, which is 1, and there's your fifth. Generally speaking, they're always the same colour, apart from B flat and B. They are different. They are, if one's a black note, the other's white, and vice versa. So E flat, for example, has got the fifth, which is the same colour. They're generally speaking the same distance apart. If you were to weld your hand in one position, you could pretty much play your roots and fifths without any trouble at all. Now, the root and the fifth gives it just a little bit of a different sort of weight to the 2 bass notes. Now, as with everything, in terms of the notes, don't go too low if the interval, like the fifth, is close, because they're a bit too close together. It sounds muddy, whereas this is better. So fifths shouldn't go too low, but they're fine up here. Now this will infuriate any Bach scholars, because you weren't allowed to do perfect fifths in parallel, G and D. That was a Bach no-no, but you know, we're dealing with rock and pop here, so it's fine. You know, the rules are there to be broken. So another way you could spread a chord, and to make it even quieter, this is the quietest version of the G chord I've just played. So I had one bass note that was higher with my chord. But if I've got a G in the left hand, I don't need it in the right hand as well. You can assume that one G is the same as all the other Gs on the piano. So I could do this. It's a more gentle version of the G chord. So I've divided the work this time. The left hand is playing the bass note, and the right hand is playing the other 2 notes of the chord. So my whole sequence could do this. So whatever note I've got here, I've made sure I haven't repeated it in the right hand. One other way you could do it is to spread the chords so that you have your root and a fifth in here with simply one note in the right hand. Familiar sounding, but it just means that you can get something really gentle. And of course, if you move it up an octave, it's always best when you're playing piano on a record is to err on the side of really light touch, because the piano really chimes when you do that, instead of, you know, if you've got something like that, it's just overpowering. Of course, in the chorus that's fine, but if you're playing an intro, now you can decorate chords. We've got the sustain pedal on a piano, which has been the feature of a piano since, well, really almost the beginning of the piano itself. But we've got here the opportunity to be able to do stuff up here. So I could have my G chord, I could start playing chords a little bit higher up, which just decorates things a bit. But watch out that that doesn't smother the vocal line or the top line or whatever it is you've got. Maybe it would be a nice intro, and then when the vocal comes in, it goes. Because you don't want. It just gets in the way. Now, with every major chord, you can add, you can add a note to make it sound a little bit more expensive. So a G chord is this, but it could also be this. Now that is the second note of the scale. It's actually called a G add 9. So you get your G, and then the 9th note, which is A. The shortcut is to think, well, it's one note above the main note, whatever the letter of the chord is. So G add 9 would have an A, D add 9 would have an E, C add 9 would have a D. In a minor chord, it's a little bit more dissonant. If I play my E minor with my 9th, it might not work so well. But actually you could add the 7th note instead. So instead of one note, the 9th being a note above your main note, the 7th is one below. So E minor, you could add your D. So you could use the 7th. So if I go from the beginning, we've got the G with the added 9th, D with the added 9th, E with the added 7th, E minor, and then C with your added 9. So you could do that with any minor chord. You could put the 7th in, and the major chord you could add the 9th or the 2nd note. So and the best thing to do is to sort of try that out, sort of work out those shapes with the added 9th. Now with a major chord you can also add the 6th note. So if I've got G, there's my 9, you can add the 6th as well, you could have both. Of course, the more complex a chord is, or the more notes there are, again, the more volume you're going to get. So I could take the G away from the right hand, because actually I've got it in the left hand. So it's just, again, a little bit more subdued. I could change the chord round, so I've got the 5th in the left hand. It's just a nice expensive sounding G chord. Of course, complexity means, yes, it can get in the way again of your vocal line, so just err on the side of caution, but it's something that you can just add as a little flavour occasionally, maybe at the beginning of the next verse, or you could build up your extra notes as you go through. So there is a little bit about how to treat a basic chord sequence like this in a few different ways.